So on Wednesday, 4 tornadoes hit Minnesota. They were all pretty minor as tornadoes go, but they caused some property damage. Some of you know about this. It was on the news that a local pastor, and I just have a policy, it was very public, but just a policy of not naming names from the pulpit. But it was on 2 different news stations that the pastor gave an interpretation of one of the tornadoes, some of the damage that was done by one tornado. It turns out that one occurred over Minneapolis and did some damage to the convention center, but also toppled the steeple of Central Lutheran Church. And it happens that the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, the ELCA, was meeting in that building. It happens that one of the topics they were discussing, which they ultimately ended up voting to affirm, was being open to gays and committed relationship being ordained in the ministry. And I'm not here to comment on that issue. The issue I want to talk about is that this person, and this kind of thinking is pretty widespread, offered the interpretation that this was a sign from God, a warning. And there was a warning to the ELCA not to condone sin. Now, the reason why that sort of thing concerns me greatly, when someone, with all the best intentions, and I respect the person and does a lot of good kingdom ministry, but when we interpret natural phenomenon like this, whether it's a tornado or anything else, and believe that we can discern the hand of God in these natural disasters or whatever they may be, that sets in motion a process of thinking that can sometimes come back to bite people in very, very difficult ways. One example, and I give this in the beginning of my book, Is God to Blame, is an example of a young lady named Melanie who had for several years, actually, her and her husband had prayed to get a child. The doctors ended up doing some tests, said, I'm sorry, you guys just are not going to be able to have a child. You have to think about adoption. And no sooner did that happen when she got pregnant. And so they were testifying how this was a miracle baby. And it still pains me when I enter back into that moment of discussing this with her. And that this was a miracle baby. And the pregnancy went fine. But somehow in the process of delivering this child, the child was killed. The cord got wrapped around its neck and it was stillborn. So here, this young lady believes that God gave her a precious gift and the baby dies in childbirth. And she went to a professor of theology and asked, why did this happen? And the professor of theology says, well, God's telling you something. There's a lesson, there's a message, something you're supposed to get out of this. She goes, well, what is it? And he says, well, I don't know. But I'm sure that when you get the message, when you learn the lesson, then perhaps then God will bless you with another child. Now, what that did for her is she believed that, and she went on. But actually, the presenting issue for her when she spoke with me was that she had lost all passion for God. And she was wondering why that was, and that's when I found out. I asked, when did this lack of passion begin? Because she said she used to be so vibrant, and it was right around the time that her baby died. And my response to her was this. It doesn't surprise me a whole lot that you've lost a little bit of passion for God. Because if I'm hearing the story you were told straight, God blessed you with a child only to kill your child in order to teach you a lesson, but he doesn't tell you what the lesson is. But maybe if you figure it out, then he'll give you a baby back. Kind of hard to get excited about that picture of God, if you ask me. That would take the wind out of my sail a little bit. And so we were able to talk around that issue and bring a different sort of interpretation to that issue. You know, here are some of the questions that I would raise about this interpretation of this tornado, just to look at this rather minor object lesson compared to the one I just gave you. And just be thinking about this and be thinking of questions you want to ask. And for those of you who read my blog on my own website, this will be a little bit repetitious, so excuse this, but it only lasts for 10 minutes, and then you can ask questions, so bear with me. But here's a question. What about all the other damage that the tornadoes did? What's the message there? Was God angry at the convention center? Someone said that Rod Stewart was supposed to be singing that night or singing the night before. Maybe God doesn't like his music. I don't know. But what was the message there? Or there's a school in North Branch that got damaged. What was God communicating there? Was that school maybe too affirming of gay kids or something? What was the message there? And if you're going to ask that question, broaden it out to what happened that same day in other parts of the country with tornadoes. That same day, around the same time, down in Illinois, another church was destroyed by a tornado. It was odd. The only thing that was left standing was the church steeple. The church had been there for over 100 years. The only thing left standing was a steeple. What is the message there? I don't know anything about the theology of that church, but there must be a point there, right? If there's a point to all of this, well then, we're very much kind of like reading tea leaves or something, trying to discern the pattern in the tea leaves. And it's kind of magical thinking. What about all the other disasters that happened? Why did this child die but not that child? This house gets struck but not that house? What's the message? What's the point? I ended up doing a little bit of research on this, just a little bit. Not that I felt it was that important, but just to sort of dig into it. And I wondered, can you see a pattern? Does anyone discern a pattern and see that it tends to be people who are the most sinful that get struck with natural disasters? I haven't noticed that yet. But I just thought I'd limit the study to tornadoes, so I did research on where tornadoes strike. Maybe it will turn out that tornadoes tend to strike more in the most sinful places. I'm thinking that Las Vegas is going to get it, Well, it turns out it's right in the Bible Belt. Oklahoma is the #1 place where tornadoes do the most damage. That doesn't fit the paradigm, I don't think. Unless God's really mad at them for some other reason, maybe. Now it's anyone's guess. Let's try to discern the hand. And it turns out that the states, really was interesting, the states which are the most liberal in terms of gay rights, Massachusetts, Vermont, they get the least tornadoes. How does that fit the paradigm? See, if you're going to claim to be able to decrypt the meaning of one tornado, it seems like you've got to be able to, if it's going to have any kind of plausibility, you have to be able to generalize it and say, well, here's proof that this is the interpretation, that ought to be a pattern. But in fact, the pattern you find is the opposite of what you'd expect to find if God, in fact, is out there kind of spinning tornadoes out to warn or get people to pay for sin or anything of the sort. And the other thing I wonder is this. You can certainly find in the Old Testament examples of God punishing people with natural disasters. Got that. That's Old Testament. But it was clear to the people under a covenantal arrangement what he was doing. There's an arrangement there, a covenant. This is my spokesperson. He's going to warn you a lot ahead of time and tell you that if you don't change, this is what will happen. And then here are the consequences that will happen if you don't change. There was a clear communication about that. But if God's trying to give a message, why is his communication so ambiguous? Why does it have to be left to speculation and guesswork?